Welcome to another edition of Roses Are Red. This episode will focus on poems about Mother. I originally offered these selections in a live reading for Mother's Day this year. I hope you'll enjoy them and that they bring to mind fond memories of your own mother or grandmother. We'll be taking this first group of readings from a book called Words of Life, and it was given to Donna and me when we were about to leave our hometown, Georgetown, Massachusetts, for a new home in Augusta, Maine. I had changed jobs again, and it meant another new beginning for us. Our friends gave us a going-away party, and this book was their gift to us. We've used it over the years numerous times to refresh and renew ourselves when life gets a little testy. It's a special book to us, and I hope that you find the readings meaningful. Our first reading is A Mother's Prayer by Margaret E. Sangster, born in New York City in 1838. She was the editor of Harper's Bazaar and died in 1912. Father in heaven, make me wise, so that my gaze may never meet a question in my children's eyes. God, keep me always kind and sweet, and patient, too, before their need. Let each vexation know its place. Let gentleness be all my creed. Let laughter live upon my face. A Mother's Day is very long. There are so many things to do, but never let me lose my song before the hardest day is through. Our next reading from this book is called Everyday Madonna, and it's written by Richard Armour, born in Los Angeles in 1906, died in 1989. He was quite famous for his poetry and his whimsy. For example, here's a little bit of doggerel that caught my attention. Shake and shake the ketchup bottle, none will come, and then a lot'll. And now to his poem, Everyday Madonna. When Father carved our Christmas bird and asked us each what we preferred, as sure as summer follows spring, came Mother's, please, I'll take the wing. We children never wondered why she did not sometimes take a thigh or choose a drumstick or a breast. We thought she liked a wing the best. She said it with such easy voice. It seemed so certainly her choice. I was a man before I knew why mothers do the things they do. This next poem is by Richard L. Evans and is called A Happy Home. What would a program on Mother's Day be without reference to home? Among the most important privileges of parents is the making of a happy home, a home where children want to be, to which they will want to return. Not a place of perfection, not a place of spotlessness, but a place of pleasantness, of helpfulness and hospitality, of some reasonable order of understanding and of love and loyalty, not marred by the tension of expecting the impossible, not strained by constant quarreling and contention, a place where mealtime is not for scolding or for finding fault, but for good memories of getting together. This next set of readings is taken from Good Poems, selected and introduced by Garrison Keillor, as read on the Writer's Almanac on public radio. There are 294 poems that individually and collectively make us love this gaudy, mother-scented, mud-bedaubed language of ours. This first poem is by Philip Appleman, born in 1926 in Kendallville, Indiana. It's called A Birthday Card for My Mother. The toughness indoor people have, the will to brave confusion in mohair sofas and crochet doilies, challenging in every tidy corner some bit of the outdoor drift and sag, the tenacity in 40 quarts of cherries up for winter, gallon churns of sherbet at family reunions, 50,000 suppers cleared away, the tempering of rent men at the front door, hanging on, light bills overdue, sons off to war or buried, daughters taking on the names of strangers. You have come through the years of wheelchairs, loneliness, a generation of pain, knotting the joints like ancient apple trees. You always knew this was no world to be weak in, where best friends wither to old phone numbers in far-off towns, where the sting of children is always sharper than serpent's teeth, where love itself goes shifting and slipping away to shadows. You have survived it all, come through wreckage and triumph hard at the center, but spreading gentleness around you. Nowhere by your bright hearth has the dust of bitterness lain unswept. Today, thinking back, thinking ahead to other birthdays, I lean upon your courage and sign this card as always, with love. Next up is this fine poem by Robert Mezey, born in Philadelphia in 1935. It's entitled, My Mother. My mother writes from Trenton, a comedian to the bone, but underneath serious and all heart. Honey, she says, be a mensch. And Mary, too, it's no good to worry. You're doing the best you can. Your dad and everyone thinks you turned out very well. So long as you pay your bills, nobody can say a word. You can tell them to drop dead to save $1. It can't hurt. Remember, Frank, you went to high school with? He still lives with his wife's mother. His wife works while he writes his books, and did he ever sell one? The 4 kids run around naked. 36, he's never had, you'll forgive my expression, even a pot to piss in, or a window to throw it. Such a smart boy. He couldn't read the footprints on the wall. Honey, you think you know all the answers, you don't. Please, try to put some money away. Believe me, it wouldn't hurt. Artist schmartist. Life's too short for that kind of, forgive me, horseshit. I know what you want better than you. All that counts is to make a good living and the best of everything, as Shalom Aleichem said. He was a great writer. Did you ever read his books, dear? You should make what he makes a year. Anyway, he says someplace poverty is no disgrace, but it's no honor either. That's what I say. Love, Mother. And our last offering from this wonderful collection is by Wendell Berry. Born in 1934 in Newcastle, Kentucky, he is a poet, essayist, novelist, farmer, and environmentalist. He once stated that one should, quote, breathe with unconditioned breath the unconditioned air, shun electric wire, communicate slowly, live a three-dimensioned life, stay away from screens, unquote. So there. Well, here is his To My Mother. I was your rebellious son, do you remember? Sometimes I wonder if you do remember, so complete has your forgiveness been. So complete has your forgiveness been, I wonder sometimes if it did not precede my wrong. And I erred, safe found within your love, prepared ahead of me the way home, or my bed at night, so that almost I should forgive you, who perhaps foresaw the worst that I might do, and forgave before I could act, causing me to smile now looking back to see how paltry was my worst compared to your forgiveness of it, already given. And this, then, is the vision of that heaven of which we have heard, where those who love each other have forgiven each other, where for that the leaves are green, the light a music in the air, and all is unentangled, and all is undismayed. Closing this segment is the gentle but earnest A Psalm of Life by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, a personal favorite of mine. It's a rousing cheer to all of us to get up and get moving. And these are the words our mothers would have charged us with as we flew the nest to strike out on our own, don't you think? Tell me not in mournful numbers life is but an empty dream. For the soul is dead that slumbers, and things are not what they seem. Life is real, life is earnest, and the grave is not its goal. Dust thou art, to dust returnest, was not spoken of the soul. Not enjoyment and not sorrow is our destined end or way, but to act, that each tomorrow find us farther than today. Art is long and time is fleeting, and our hearts, though stout and brave, still, like muffled drums, are beating funeral marches to the grave. In the world's broad field of battle, in the bivouac of life, be not like dumb, driven cattle, be a hero in the strife. Trust no future, howe'er pleasant. Let the dead past bury its dead. Act in the living present, heart within and God o'erhead. Lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing leave behind us footprints on the sands of time. Footprints that perhaps another, sailing o'er life's solemn main, a forlorn and shipwrecked brother, seeing shall take heart again. Let us then be up and doing, with a heart for any fate, still achieving, still pursuing, learn to labor and to wait. Keeping this poem in mind, I'm going to transition to another book of poetry called Best Loved Poems and read to you a parody on a Psalm of Life by Oliver Wendell Holmes. It's a tongue-in-cheek offering that offsets Longfellow's poem with a little bit of humor. Life is real, life is earnest, and the shell is not its pen. Egg thou art, and egg remainest, was not spoken of the hen. Art is long and time is fleeting, be our bills then sharpened well, and not like muffled drums be beating on the inside of the shell. In the world's broad field of battle, in the great barnyard of life, be not like those lazy cattle, be a rooster in the strife. Lives of roosters all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and when roasted, leave behind us hen tracks on the sands of time. Hen tracks that perhaps another chicken drooping in the rain, some forlorn and hen-pecked brother, when he sees, shall crow again. Clever, don't you think? Oliver Wendell Holmes was a contemporary of Longfellow, and he lived from 1809 to 1894 and was an author, physician, educator, and served on the Supreme Court. Holmes and Longfellow often met and discussed common interests. Next, we hear another one from Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Born in Portland, Maine in 1807, he's well known for his many bestsellers, Evangeline, A Tale of Arcady, The Courtship of Miles Standish, Tales of a Wayside Inn, and too many others to mention. We're going to try and focus our attention on some of his poetry that speaks of motherhood, the home, and a heart filled with love, beginning with this seldom heard poem, Neapolitan Canzonet. A canzonet, by the way, is a short, light-hearted song or air. One morning, on the seashore as I strayed, my heart dropped in the sand beside the sea. I asked of yonder mariners who said they saw it in thy bosom, worn by thee. And I am come to seek that heart of mine, for I have none, and thou, alas, hast two. If this be so, dost know what thou shalt do? Still keep my heart, and give me thine. The next reading comes from Longfellow's epic poem, Hiawatha. If you remember reading this poem as a child, you probably know Hiawatha's grandmother was Nokomis. Do you remember his mother's name? Well, in this passage, excerpted from the poem, you'll hear of his mother and of his earliest childhood. Fascinating reading. I hope you enjoy it. There among the ferns and mosses, there among the prairie lilies, on the muscoday, the meadow, in the moonlight and the starlight, fair Nokomis bore a daughter, and she called her name Wenonah. As the firstborn of her daughters, and the daughters of Nokomis, grew up like the prairie lilies, grew a tall and slender maiden with the beauty of the moonlight, with the beauty of the starlight. And Nokomis warned her often, saying oft and oft repeating, "Oh, beware the Mudjekeewis, of the west wind Mudjekeewis. Listen not what he tells you, lie not down upon the meadow, stoop not down among the lilies, let the west wind come and harm you." But she heeded not the warning. Thus was born my Hiawatha, thus was born the child of wonder. But the daughter of Nokomis, Hiawatha's gentle mother, in her anguish died deserted by the west wind false and faithless, by the heartless Mudjekeewis. By the shores of Gitche-Gumee, by the shining big sea water, stood the wigwam of Nokomis, daughter of the moon Nokomis. Dark behind it rose the forest, rose the black and gloomy pine trees, rose the firs with cones upon them. Bright before it beat the water, beat the clear and sunny water, beat the shining big sea water. There the wrinkled old Nokomis nursed the little Hiawatha, rocked him in his linden cradle, bedded soft in moss and rushes, safely bound with reindeer sinews, stilled his fretful wail by saying, "Hush, the naked bear will hear thee," lulled him into slumber singing, "Ewaye, my little owlet, who is this that lights the wigwam? With his great eyes lights the wigwam. Ewaye, my little owlet. Next, I have a beautiful poem by Edna St. Vincent Millay. She was educated at Vassar and published several books of poetry, including this tragedy called The Ballad of the Harp Weaver. Son, said my mother when I was knee-high, you've need of clothes to cover you, and not a rag have I. There's nothing in the house to make a boy breeches, no shears to cut a cloth with, nor thread to take stitches. There's nothing in the house but a loaf end of rye and a harp with a woman's head nobody will buy. And she began to cry. This was in the early fall. When came the late fall, son, she said, the sight of you makes your mother's blood crawl. Little skinny shoulder blades sticking through your clothes, and where you'll get a jacket from, God above knows. It's lucky for me, lad, your daddy's in the ground and can't see the way I let his son go round. And she made a queer sound. That was in the late fall. When the winter came, I'd not a pair of breeches nor a shirt to my name. I couldn't go to school or out of doors to play, and all the other little boys passed our way. Son, said my mother, come, climb into my lap, and I'll chafe your little bones while you take a nap. And oh, but we were silly for half an hour or more, me with my long legs dragging on the floor. A rock, rock, rocking to a Mother Goose rhyme. Oh, but we were happy for half an hour's time. But there was I, a great boy, but what would folks say to hear my mother's singing me to sleep all day in such a daft way? Men say the winter was bad that year, fuel was scarce and food was dear. A wind with a wolf's head howled about our door, and we burned up the chairs and sat upon the floor. All that was left us was a chair we couldn't break, and the harp with a woman's head nobody would take, for song or for pity's sake. The night before Christmas I cried with the cold. I cried myself to sleep like a 2-year-old. And in the deep night I felt my mother rise and stare down upon me with love in her eyes. I saw my mother sitting on the one good chair, a light falling on her from I couldn't tell where, looking 19 and not a day older, and the harp with a woman's head leaned against her shoulder. Her thin fingers moving in the thin, tall strings were weaving wonderful things. Many bright threads from where I couldn't see were running through the harp strings rapidly, and gold threads whistling through my mother's hand. I saw the web grow and the pattern expand. She wove a child's jacket, and when it was done, she laid it on the floor and wove another one. She wove a red cloak so regal to me. She's made it for a king's son, I said, not for me. But I knew it was for me. She wove a pair of breeches. Quicker than that, she wove a pair of boots and a little cocked hat. She wove a pair of mittens. She wove a little blouse. She wove all night in the still, cold house. She sang as she worked, and the harp strings spoke. Her voice never faltered, and the thread never broke. And when I awoke, there sat my mother, with the harp against her shoulder, looking 19, not a day older. A smile about her lips, and a light about her head, and her hands in the harp strings, frozen dead. And piled up beside her, toppling to the skies, were the clothes of a king's son, just my size. Wow, you talk about a tearjerker. She ranks right up there with Longfellow, don't you think? Well, our next selection is a bit unusual. It's a creation of the sprightly mind of Robert Service, a Brit most well known for his poetry of the Yukon Gold Rush, the shooting of Dan McGraw, the cremation of Sam McGee, for example. But in this selection, he offers a witty little poem called Maternity that's as clever as it is catchy. There once was a square, such a square little square, and he loved a trim triangle. But she was a flirt, and around her skirt vainly she made him dangle. Oh, he wanted to wed, and he had no dread of domestic woes and wrangles, for he thought that his fate was to procreate cute little squares and triangles. Now it happened one day on that geometric way, there swaggered a big, bold cube with a haughty stare, and he made that square have the air of a perfect boob. To his solid spell the triangle fell, and she thrilled with love's sweet sickness. For she took delight in his breadth and height, but oh, how she adored his thickness. So that poor little square just died of despair, for his love he could not strangle, while the old bold cube led to the bridal bed, that cute and acute triangle. The square's sad lot she had long forgot, and his passionate pretensions, but she dotes on her kids. Oh, such cute pyramids in the world of 3 dimensions. Our last book of poetry is called Good Poems for Hard Times, another compilation of wonderful short poems gathered together and published by Garrison Keillor of Prairie Home Companion fame, Saturday nights from 6 to 8 p.m. on public radio. This anthology is described by Garrison Keillor as follows, quote, "Poetry is the last preserve of honest speech and the outspoken heart. It holds the cadence of common life, and the meaning of poetry is to give courage," unquote. Listen to this first selection by the aforementioned Edna St. Vincent Millay. It's called The Courage That My Mother Had. The courage that my mother had went with her and is with her still. Rock from New England quarried, now granite in a granite hill. The golden brooch my mother wore she left behind for me to wear. I have no thing I treasure more, yet it is something I could spare. Oh, if instead she'd left to me the thing she took into the grave, that courage like a rock, which she has no more need of, and I have. This next one, called Ordinary Life, is especially meaningful to anyone who has raised a family while staying home and keeping the home fires burning day by day, every day forever, or so it seems. The author is Barbara Crooker, born in 1945 in Cold Spring, New York. This was a day when nothing happened. The children went off to school without a murmur, remembering their books and lunches and gloves. All morning the baby and I built block stacks in the squares of light on the floor, and lunch blended into nap time. I cleaned out kitchen cupboards, one of those jobs that never gets done, and then sat in a circle of sunlight and drank ginger tea. Watched the birds at the feeder jostle over lunch's little scraps. A pheasant strutted from the hedgerow, preened and flashed his jeweled head. Now a chicken roasts in the pan, and the children return. The murmur of their stories dappling the air. I peel carrots and potatoes without paring my thumb. We listen together for your wheels on the drive, grace before bread, and at the table actual conversation. No bickering or pokes. And then the drift into homework. The baby goes to his cars and drives them along the sofa's ridges and hills. Leaning by the counter, we steal a long, slow kiss, tasting of coffee and cream. The chickens diminish to skin and skeleton, the moon to a comma, a sliver of white. But this has been a day of grace in the dead of winter, the hard, cold knuckle of the year, a day that unwrapped itself like an unexpected gift, and the stars turn on order themselves into the winter night. This next one just tickles me through and through. It's written by Ginger Andrews, no relation to me, from North Bend, Oregon. She was born in 1956 and teaches Sunday school and cleans houses for a living. And she writes, "There's never a dull moment, but I'm praying for one." And here's her poem called The Cure. Lying around all day with some strange, new, deep blue weekend funk, I'm not really asleep when my sister calls to say she's just hung up from talking with Aunt Bertha, who's 89 and ill, but managing to take care of Uncle Frank, who's completely bedridden. Aunt Bert says it's snowing there in Arkansas on Catfish Lane, and she hasn't been able to walk out to their mailbox. She's been suffering from a bad case of the mullygrubs. The cure for the mullygrubs, she tells my sister, is to get up and bake a cake. If that doesn't do it, put on a red dress. It almost makes you want to go put on a red dress, doesn't it? Ha! And our last reading from this anthology is this wonderful little poem from a mother to her 5-year-old daughter called For a 5-Year-Old, written by Fleur Adcock, born in New Zealand in 1934, moving to England later, soft and gentle and just a little funny. I hope you like it. A snail is climbing up the windowsill into your room after a night of rain. You call me in to see it. I explain that it would be unkind to leave it there. It might crawl to the floor. We must take care that no one squashes it. You understand and carry it outside with a careful hand to eat a daffodil. I see then that a kind of faith prevails. Your gentleness is molded still by words from me, who have trapped mice and shot wild birds, from me who drowned your kittens, who betrayed your closest relatives, and who purveyed the harshest kind of truth to many another. But that is how things are. I am your mother, and we are kind to snails. Moving right along, I couldn't resist this next work called The Patter of the Shingle, taken from the Best Loved Poems anthology. If I had to choose an axiom that would set up the sprightly little poem, it would be spare the rod and spoil the child. Hang on to your seats. This one is special. When the angry passion gathering in my mother's face I see, and she leads me to the bedroom, gently lays me on her knee, then I know that I will catch it, and my flesh in fancy itches as I listen for the patter of the shingle on my breeches. Every tingle of the shingle has an echo and a sting, and 1,000 burning fancies into active being spring. And 1,000 bees and hornets neath my coattail seem to swarm as I listen to the patter of the shingle, oh so warm. In a splutter comes my father, who is supposed has gone, to survey the situation and tell her to lay it on. To see her bending o'er me as I listen to the strain played by her and by the shingle in a wild and weird refrain. In a sudden intermission, which appears my only chance, I say, "Strike gently, mother, or you'll split my Sunday pants." She stops a moment, draws her breath, and the shingle holds aloft, and says, "I had not thought of that, my son. Just take them off." Holy Moses and the angels, cast your pitying glances down, and thou, our family doctor, put a good soft poultice on. And may I with fools and dunces everlastingly commingle, if I ever say another word when my mother wields the shingle. I'm going to close with Longfellow. In 1878, when he was 71 years old, he published an anthology called Keramos, which included our next poem, our last poem for today, called Nature. He would die within 4 years at the age of 75, and when I read this poem, I kind of wonder, can't help but think of him and wonder if perhaps he knew his time was growing short. This poem is special, and it holds great meaning for all of us as we contemplate our age and our life. Here's our final poem for today in celebration of Mother's Day. As a fond mother, when the day's o'er, leads by the hand her little child to bed, half willing, half reluctant to be led, and leave his broken playthings on the floor, still gazing at them through the door, not wholly reassured and comforted by promises of others in their stead, which, though more splendid, may not please him more. So nature deals with us and takes away our playthings one by one, and by the hand leads us to rest so gently that we go, scarce knowing if we wish to go or stay, being too full of sleep to understand how far the unknown transcends the what we know. Happy Mother's Day to all. Thank you so much for listening. This is Bruce Andrews with Roses Are Red.